Hello, everybody. Welcome to the BasuandGodin Notebook. I'm Marc-Antoine Godin. Arpin, the NHL Draft weekend is over. They made through it, and somehow we're making through it too. we had a bit of issues, huh? So
we had a lot of issues. So yeah, our plan was to do this after day 2 on Saturday. It just didn't work. We tried very hard, but here we are on Sunday to break it all down. And honestly, this is a huge, massively consequential weekend for the Montreal Canadiens, and really a big step in their rebuild. And the acquisition of Noah Dobson on Friday prior to day 1, or prior to the first round of the draft, monetizing those 2 draft picks, which everyone thought was going to be very difficult, that there was no market for these picks, that all these first round offers were floating around. Ultimately, the only team that managed to trade the picks in that range, when we were looking like 9 to 20, Buffalo, Anaheim, Pittsburgh, Vancouver, Detroit, Columbus, all these teams were willing to trade their first round picks. Montreal was the one that was able to get it done and got themselves one of the most difficult pieces to acquire when building a team, in being a first pair right shot, mobile, long, rangy defenseman in Noah Dobson.
I find it interesting that we heard that Columbus was in the running for Dobson. They had picks number 14 and 20, which you could argue is a similar value than 16 and 17. It's pretty darn close.
Yeah.
And then it basically is the third asset that remains the difference if you choose to offer your 2 first-round picks plus something else. So, I mean, good on the Canadiens to have been able to prevail and come out on top on this one, because it's a hefty price. But at the same time, who knows how long it would take before the guys that are taken in the middle of the first round, if they are ever going to make an impact, would come close to provide what Noah Dobson will provide them as soon as next season. I mean, they're acquiring a guy who's in his mid-20s, who's entering his prime. They're locking him up for 8 years. So all his prime years are going to be, taken care of, basically. I think that he arrives at a sweet spot in his career where basically he joins a young nucleus, a young core. So in terms of the age bracket, it really fits what they're doing.
It does. And I think the fact that Columbus was in there, you look at 14 and 20, according to Dom Lucian's draft pick value chart. That's a mouthful. 14 and 20 comes out to roughly a 9.1 figure in terms of his metric of expected wins and what have you. 16 and 17 comes out to 9.2. So it's pretty much equal.
Yeah.
It's been reported, and I believe it to be true, that the Blue Jackets might have been willing to put Voronkov on the table, who is a pretty impactful forward, more impactful than Emil Heineman, frankly. With all due respect to Heineman, I think he's going to be a very good NHL player, or already is a very good NHL player, but is more of a depth guy. And so it sounds like it really just came down to, and Ken Hughes mentioned this, it came down to Noah Dobson's desire to sign with Montreal. And the thing about this trade is that, Noah Dobson did not have a no trade clause, but he held a lot of the cards, because him signing an extension was going to be what triggered the value coming back. Neither Columbus nor Montreal would have given what they gave if he was not already locked into an extension. So that's something that's significant, and so there's 2 elements to this, but I think this first element is fascinating and really has been almost unprecedented in recent Canadiens history, or even going back 15, 20 years is Noah Dobson looked at the Canadiens, and while he mentioned how playing in this great hockey market was very appealing to him, he loves playing at the Bell Center, blah blah blah. A lot of players say that. Um, his prime reason for wanting to join the Canadiens is what he sees happening with the Canadiens. He talked about playing with Mike Matheson at the World Championships and hearing about how tight knit the group was, how they enjoy coming to the rink, how they're all pushing for the same goal, how they're the whole experience is pleasant. The group is pleasant. He knows Nick Suzuki from from playing on the World Junior Championships with him on Team Canada. This is this is something that could be potentially game changing for the Montreal Canadiens. That Noah Dobson made this decision based primarily, not solely, but primarily on the fact that what he heard about playing in Montreal, not the city, not the building, but on the actual team itself, and what he sees happening in the future and the potential for him to win over the course of this 8-year deal appealed to him. And that's a big endorsement in my eyes for what's happened so far with the Montreal Canadiens rebuild. And so that changes a lot. And we'll see if that has some sort of snowball effect where now that Dobson's added to that group, maybe that group becomes even more appealing for future players to make the same decision.
Yeah, well, players want to win. Huh? Ultimately, that's what it comes down to. And sometimes you hear them say, they go for like a big contract somewhere. And when they say, I want to win here, you're kind of like, really? Was that you chose that destination as let's say as a free agent because you wanted to win and you're picking this team or that team? But I think that in this case, what's interesting is that it's really a situation that seems to be prevailing more and more, where you have guys who are 1 year away from free agency, they're at the end of their contract, and they can already guide their current team into, forcing them into a corner, say, well, guys, I'm not going to stay here long term. So here's where I think you could get value for me, because this is where I think I would sign a contract. We saw it obviously with Matthew Tkachuk going to Florida, from Calgary to Florida, and it's always the same teams.
We saw it with Max Pacioretty.
Absolutely,
nixing the trade to LA. Yeah,
but it's always the same teams, it seems, that attract that sort of player, right? There's a magnet attached to certain teams and not necessarily to others, and that's where I think that it's not groundbreaking, but certainly a very, very interesting development for the Canadiens, that they enter that conversation where, how Jeff Gorton has kept saying over time, we want to make Montreal the destination again. Well, this is a sign that they're becoming a destination. The results are encouraging. They're not there yet, but they're certainly encouraging. And when you have a guy like Noah Dobson who says, this is where I want to go, well, it puts the wheels in motion, and it could be the beginning of more things to come, just by the mere fact that he was brought into the Canadiens. And you look at them now, they're going to be even more competitive because of him.
And the thing about this, how long has Jeff Gorton, you mentioned Jeff Gorton, and how long has he been asked, please compare what you did in New York to what's going on in Montreal? And he's like, I see a lot of similarities. Well, the similarity here is Noah Dobson's arrival. Now, he's not on the same level, so don't start saying I'm comparing, but still, it comes at around the same point in a rebuild where the Rangers signed Artemi Panarin in unrestricted free agency to the contract that he's still on right now. It was at this stage where you make that big addition that drives it forward, and that it becomes a catalyzing kind of effect on the whole thing, and it propels you into a certain level of competition. Now, in Panarin's case, obviously he's a superstar. There are very few players as impactful as him in the league, but where the comparison fits is that, Panarin is one of a handful of wingers that apply to what Jeff Gorton said at the end of the season, where, sometimes you don't have to get a center. You can get a play driving winner who has 100 points and blah, 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 blah. And you looked at the list and it's like, okay, well, you're talking about like 5 guys, there's not, those guys literally don't grow on trees. Dobson's similar in the sense that 6'4", right shot, mobile, offensive, rangy defenseman who is not physical but defends with his feet and with his length. Is the flavor du jour in the NHL. This is what teams are all after. Building a decor with that type of player is what teams are looking to do. The Florida Panthers added Seth Jones at the deadline. Everyone was wondering, like, have you seen this guy play the last couple of years? Blah blah blah. But it's the fact is the tools were similar: big, mobile, rangy, offensive, puck moving defenseman, right shot. Um, these are rare commodities, and so the Canadiens getting one at this stage that they could bank on, and we'll get into the degree to which they can bank on this in a second. But um, having confidence that Noah Dobson is that piece um, is changes a lot for them. But it's the rarity of the profile that makes it so interesting, in the sense that at the end of the season, Jeff Gordon said there's not one area of our team where we're looking at it and we're saying, oh, we're done there. We have a lot of work to do. Well, I don't know. The blue line's starting to look kind of done. Like, that's like not totally done, but you look at left side or left shot, Goalie, Hudson, right shot, Dobson, one day probably Reinbacher, who they drafted hoping he would become some version of Dobson. Um, that looks pretty solid, and then whatever you do on the third pair and fill in around that. But as a basis for a blue line core that's young, Dobson's the oldest of those four at 25. Goolie's just coming into his prime. Hudson, obviously, we don't need to go on about him. And then Reinbacher, we'll see. It still remains to be seen, but it's a promising toolkit that does project to be a top four NHL defenseman. And when he was drafted, a lot of the analysts were like, well, he could be a top pair, but he'll definitely be a top four. And so now, if he's not a top pair, it's really not that big of a deal. It's like you have him in your top four, you're doing pretty well. And if he plays the way I think, and I think most people think he's going to wind up playing in the NHL, having him on your second pairing, you're laughing. You're really looking good. So that blue line looks like it can be more or less set aside as a priority. And now you have all these other defensemen that could fill it in and ultimately serve as potential trade chips. You go down the list and there's a lot of guys fighting for two spots, and not all of them are going to make it that far. So I think Ken Hughes and Jeff Gordon have a lot of material to work with in terms of the bank of defensemen that are kind of outside that group of four that they could use to try and upgrade things at forward.
So here in Los Angeles, I came here to cover this amazing event.
We're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. Don't worry.
So, and I bumped into Rob Ramage, who was here to welcome the Canadiens draft picks.
Yes.
So he was not busy on Friday night, obviously for obvious reasons, but even on Saturday, because none of the 9 guys that the Canadiens drafted were in attendance, and the further you got into the draft, the less likely it would be that they would be in attendance, because there was a very finite number of prospects in attendance to start with.
I think there were 90. I think.
Yeah,
90. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, he said, I'm here. I'm like for the older ones among you. He said, I'm like the Maytag repair guy. I'm waiting for some work. So he ended up not doing anything, but we had a chat, and as a guy who looks over the development of young players, he sees really positively the fact that they won't have to rush either Reinbacher or Mailloux in Montreal, because there was still a need. As our regular listeners know, I've been hammering that point about right-handed shot defensemen since the days before they acquired Alexandre Carrier. Now they acquired Noah Dobson. I think that they're set on that side. They solved that issue, and it really puts away that pressure that you would have to fill a hole with either a young player or an asset or player that you could bring from outside that's maybe not exactly up to the level or or carrying the sort of contract that you want to have. So it really checks a lot of boxes at once. And for the development of both Reinbacher and Mailloux, even if it means a third year in the AHL for Mailloux, even if he becomes trade bait, I think that it seems more likely than ever now. But if we focus on Reinbacher, I think that the promise and the upside is definitely there. But it's just that it's not necessarily. Huh?
The timing is not right to get him to have him make the jump. Probably
that's
it's not ideal. It's not ideal.
No, and you know what? If he starts well in Laval and you've got a need at some point, you can bring him in November, December, and then here we go, and it's going to be fine. Yeah. It's just it might have been a little bit tight to start the season. Now you don't have to worry about that anymore. So I think that even from a developmental standpoint for the whole organization, it's really encouraging.
Well, yeah, and plus Mike Matheson's still around, right? And he wasn't mentioned in that group of four defensemen I said before. So for the meantime, you could play a Matheson with Dobson, maybe, even though they're both somewhat turnover prone, and so that might not be the best match. But keep Hudson on the right for now. If Reinbacher does have to go back to Laval, but anyhow, it opens up a world of possibilities for both management and the coaching staff. To do various things. Alexandre Carrier is still there. He, like, the Dobson acquisition basically makes it so that they replace David Savard with Alex Carrier. Like, that's an
upgrade.
It's for sure. All due respect to Savard, it's for sure an upgrade. It slots Carrier in a more appropriate slot as a third pairing guy, as a really good third pairing guy. And then what happens next to him remains to be seen. Obviously, you have Xhekaj, you have Struble. No one talks about him, but Adam Engstrom is pushing hard from Laval. Like, he had an excellent playoffs with them. Was probably their most impressive young defenseman in the playoffs. And so, but again, that's the thing. And the Canadiens making it as far as they did. When we had Bruno Gervais on, and he was talking about, right now there's only 8 teams playing North American professional hockey. There's 4 in the NHL and there's 4 in the AHL. So you're getting a lot of eyeballs on these kids. And so, I have to think the Canadiens should be able to be somewhat aggressive with at least some of these defensemen. The beauty of their situation is they could trade one and it doesn't severely weaken their pool, right? If you trade a Mailloux or you trade an Engstrom, you still have the other one. So that's exceedingly rare. You don't have 2 guys generally on AHL teams that you could project to be, not just NHL defensemen, but pretty good NHL defensemen. So that's a commodity that the Canadiens have and that they can weaponize in the coming days. I think the Dobson trade creates a surplus. And the Canadiens have long felt that they want to operate by trading from a surplus to address a shortage. They have a shortage of top 6 forwards right now. They have a surplus of young, close to NHL caliber defensemen. They use their surplus of draft capital to go get Dobson. They don't have a surplus of draft capital anymore, not really. So that the Dobson trade helps that. That's the second part of this trade that I find interesting for the Canadiens, is that it creates a workable surplus from in a commodity that is sought after. It's something that other teams need. Young, mobile, NHL caliber defensemen who are on the cusp of starting their careers and will be under team control, and their prime is probably 3-4 years away. That's attractive. So,
and the thing also is the fact that none of these young defensemen was needed to acquire Dobson.
Exactly, which is stunning almost. I mean, honestly, like it's the most shocking part of the trade is that they still have this cache of young defensemen untouched, and I don't understand, frankly, why. Well, we don't know if he asked for it or not, and if he asked and Ken Hughes just said no, then power to Ken Hughes. But I was fully expecting when the rumors started that that Logan Mailloux was going to be part of the package going the other way, it just made sense. It's like here you trade this guy, but you get this guy who's probably not going to be as good as Dobson, but will be pretty good, in the same kind of mold as Dobson. So yeah. So now the Canadiens can use that to trade to try and address the hole up front.
Before we get into the salary the salary thing and what they gave, the contract they gave Dobson, I just want to pause for a minute on Emil Heineman, because as a guy who probably has third line potential at this point, I don't think he's going to crack a top six, but he's going to be a reliable NHLer with third line upside. That makes him replaceable, but at the same time, the style of play that he provided, being both a speedy guy and someone who's so effective on the forecheck, it made him ideal for Martin St. Louis' style of play. And in that sense, I know for a fact that they're a little bit concerned with the speed that they've got up front, and they're
100%, yeah,
and that or lack thereof. So trading Heineman doesn't really help in that department, and in puck retrievals either. So, how challenging do you think it's going to be to replace Heineman? Not necessarily as in terms of finding another third line or fourth liner, but as just finding someone who has that profile.
Yeah, that's definitely a fair point, and I think a lot of people who say like maybe this is time to sell high on Josh Anderson. I think a big reason why the Canadiens aren't interested in trading Josh Anderson right now is because he brings that speed element, and so Heineman is similar, he's Josh Anderson light, I guess, in literal terms, but also in terms of his quality. But they play the same style of game, and those players are going to be in demand. And I think this is an example of why they are in demand. I mean, the fact that he was a desirable piece for the Islanders shows that the whole league is trending in this direction of guys who can pressure the puck, take away time and space, be effective on the forecheck. And the fact that Heineman has some offense in him, like he has a plus NHL shot that can be used on the power play, that will be tough to replace. They don't have that in their pipeline necessarily in that form, and so, but that is something that you can maybe find on the free agent market. You can find via trade. But yeah, like you look at their depth, and the fact that it would appear at least possible, if not likely, that Joel Armia is going to be going to market on Tuesday. You lose Heineman. Heineman was seen, I think, as a future penalty killer for this team, perhaps a replacement for Joel Armia on the penalty kill. Now you don't have that anymore. It's an issue now. Obviously, Armia's speed wasn't anything to write home about, but he was still an effective forechecker, a guy who could play along the walls, battle, and Heineman did the same thing. So there's still work to be done for sure. And I don't think it's fair to call Heineman replaceable, but he's not easily replaceable. There is a profile there that's in high demand. Will be tough to replace, but it is easier to find that than a top pair right shot D. So that comes into account. So, but having said that, the fact that Dobson's available, the fact that the Islanders seemingly weren't willing to give him the contract the Canadiens ultimately gave him, should be, is a bit of a red flag here, right? Obviously, like it's when players like Dobson are so rare and they're so hard to acquire and you can basically only draft them. When a team says, you know what, we're good, we're not going to give you that kind of money, which is honestly a pretty reasonable contract if Dobson hits the way he was trending before this past season, that contract's going to look really good if he continues on that trajectory. The fact is that he did not continue on that trajectory. Last season was a blip. The Islanders as a team had a lot of trouble scoring. Their power play was abysmal. One of the worst in the league, if not the worst. But
they lost Barzal for most of the year.
And so, a lot of things kind of happen. And Dobson, was pretty good about it. Like, you know, when I asked him just to kind of how would you characterize last season for you, because you can look at your stat sheet and it didn't look good. You know, you have anyone has a 31 point dip in their production. You can't just write that off. And seemed pretty honest about it and said, this is a learning experience. I need to be able to continue to provide other things when the production's not there and what have you. And I got to learn from it and I got to fight through that stuff. Maybe it will be a learning experience for him, but he does have some degree of burden of proof to show that last season was an anomaly. Kent Hughes seemed to believe that. He actually had trouble saying the word anomaly in French, even though it's the exact same word in English. But he wasn't able to really get it out. But he did consider it an outlier, let's say. And as mentioned, I think the Canadiens have had their eye on the Dobson profile for a long time. And so the fact that they could literally get Noah Dobson, they were going to probably overlook certain things. They're probably predisposed to overlooking those things because they were very interested in this player for a while, and were quite eager to fill that spot. So I would tend to agree that it's probably an outlier, but that remains to be seen, and it's something that we're going to have to monitor this season because the turnovers, like Islanders fans were very frustrated for much of the same reason why Canadiens fans get frustrated with Mike Matheson. Islanders fans were frustrated with Noah Dobson for a lot of those same reasons: puck management, turnovers at inopportune times and places, and just generally mistake prone might be a little heavy, but tended to make mistakes with the puck.
Yeah, I bumped into an Islanders fan who came here for the draft, obviously, because of Matthew Schaefer, and he had a Noah Dobson jersey on. So I needed to talk to him and ask him about the trade. And this is something that he brought up, the turnovers. And the red flag you mentioned, well, on the one hand, the fact that they draft Matthew Schaefer, of course, he's not a right shot D. Being a left shot defenseman is a different thing, but they've got their number one defenseman of the future. I guess that might have weighted in the balance and to a certain extent. Say, are we going to give all that money that Dobson is seeking when we have a guy who's about to become our number one defenseman in pretty short order? I don't know if it's going to be in 2 years or 3 years or whatever, but it's, even if it takes a little bit of time, they can be confident that Matthew Schaefer is going to be their number one defenseman. So there's also the fact that Dobson maybe priced himself out of Long Island by saying, you know what, I'm shooting for the moon. So, which will encourage you to trade me.
Well, he asked for $11 million, right? That was the report. The reported ask was $11 million a year. Yeah, which you start high in a negotiation. It doesn't mean you necessarily want $11 million, but
no,
you start
that's
high.
it.
Yeah,
and you don't have to ask for the same amount depending on who you're negotiating with, obviously.
Yes.
But the red flag also, and that's where maybe the question of the outlier or the anomaly comes in play here. It's that I really wonder to which extent Patrick Roy had an impact on his production. Because you look at Noah Dobson's production under Patrick Roy, which is 105 games, if I'm not mistaken, and you match that with how he fared in the year and a half before or 2 years before, and it's night and day. There was a really significant drop almost from the time that Roy started behind the bench in Long Island. So if the Canadiens got in Noah Dobson, the Noah Dobson who played under Lane Lambert, who was trending to be, maybe not a point per game guy, but certainly like
pretty damn close. Yeah,
pretty damn close. Well, then it will soon become like almost a bargain at $9.5 million a season. If it's not an outlier, then it's an issue. So I think that what makes it interesting is that Dobson has more pieces in front of him at the forward position than the Islanders have to help him generate that offense. It will be also. It's weird to say insulated because he'll be the one who's the top pairing guy, but having Lane Hutson on another pairing, you got two elite puck movers right now, which is super interesting for the Canadiens. But if he's concerned with production, I just wonder, with Hudson being around, you can't expect Noah Dobson to play on power play one unless Martin St. Louis says, you know what, things have changed. We have a whole new setup now with Dobson and Hudson both here. I'm going to use them both on my PP1, but the more likely option, or the one that spontaneously we would think of, is that the Canadiens are going to start with the power play that they ended the season with Demidov and all that, and have a super strong second power play unit, which is exciting in itself.
Well, and I think that transfers to 5-on-5, right? I mean, you look at Dobson, you look at the possibility that Martin St. Louis has. We don't know who's going to play with who, but personally, I would separate Hudson and Dobson and have one of them on their own pairing, and that way you can have one of them on the ice for 45 to 50 minutes a game, somewhere in that, probably closer to 45 minutes a game, where one of Hudson or Dobson is on the ice. And this, I think, speaks to the need to upgrade the second line, which right now consists of Ivan Demidov and question marks. If the Canadiens are unable to do anything in the coming days, which they are trying to do, they are trying to upgrade there. Kirby Dach looks like he's going to get another shot at that spot. And then who plays next to him? Line is obviously still around. I think in an ideal world, the Canadiens would like to have someone else fill that spot. But having one of Dobson or Hudson on the ice for such a long, and frankly, for those top two lines, almost every time they're on the ice, one of those two guys will be on the ice with them. Because this season, you couldn't blame some of the other lines being like, why don't we ever get to play with Lane Hudson? Like, it's great. It's great that Nick Suzuki, that they're so effective together, but we never get any time with that guy. Like, it's going to be hard. It's harder. It's easier to score goals when you got a guy like that on the ice. Well, now you're going to have him and Dobson, and that was kind of the point that Ken Hughes made when I asked him, like, does this sort of alleviate somewhat the pressure to upgrade the second line? Like, does having Dobson make the guys you already have somewhat better? And he pointed out that it is good to have that more lines will get to play with a guy like Dobson or Hudson. But he also kind of brushed that off, and he directly went to what we mentioned earlier, that this is going to attract players. This might help attract players to Montreal because they will get a chance to have either Dobson or Hudson on the ice behind them very often. And so, offensively for the Canadiens, that's a big change, because Matheson, though 2 years ago or last season, I guess we could still say, he was that guy. He was the play driver from the blue line that you wanted to play with. He wasn't that guy this past season. He's probably going to be even less so that guy next season. Yeah. And so, what's going to happen with Matheson is very interesting. His contract's up. Obviously, you saw them hold that long meeting in Buffalo, where I do believe at least the concepts or parameters of what a contract extension might look like began being fleshed out. Nothing concrete, no obvious numbers being exchanged, but what Matheson's role will be going forward, what kind of contract he can expect what kind of contract the Canadiens might be comfortable with, what would Matheson be comfortable with. And so with him coming up with 1 year left on his contract, he has also become part of that surplus, right? Like he is definitely in that conversation where if the Canadiens want to upgrade up front, Matheson's like peak value could probably be realized in another situation where his puck moving ability and his elite skating ability become more valued on a team where maybe the defense isn't quite as mobile, and they're looking for that element. Right now, it's pretty clear that if Matheson stays with the Canadiens, he's going to be asked to fill not just a similar role to this past season, but a double down on that role where you become truly a defensive guy, and you are very discouraged to doing what Mike Matheson loves to do, which is to take risks, to create, to be offensive, to be imaginative, and to use his feet to his top potential. And I don't know if he's going to have that mandate with Dobson and Hudson already on the blue line.
No, I know and if he wants to showcase that offensive side of him, which has been prominent throughout his career, he'll have a lesser chance to do that from this point on. I don't know if it seals his fate with the Canadiens, if he looks at his role from now on and say, you know what, this is probably not the best fit for me anymore. We'll see about that. But in terms of minute-eating defensemen, it's very attractive now because the top four, as it currently stands, has four guys who can all play comfortably 21, 22 minutes. Because I think that Goalie's ice time is going to increase if he stays healthy. Hudson doesn't need to increase his ice time, but I think
he needs to lower it.
Yeah, but situationally, I think it can be brought. He can be used in different situations. But Matheson becomes like this super mobile defensive defenseman. He's like almost he'll be asked to be like almost just a better left-handed version of Alexandre Carrier in that sense, So we'll see if that remains.
He could play with Alexandre Carrier if Reinbacher makes the team.
Yeah,
then I could see a world where you go Hudson, Goalie, Matheson, and you have Matheson playing with Carrier on the third pairing. Now this is not.
Well, that means no Jack-Eye, no Struble.
Well, yeah. But that's the kind of decision they would have to make. And even if he doesn't make the team, if he gets called up at some point, the way you mentioned, which I think is the most likely scenario, that's probably how it would play out. No?
Yeah.
I mean, is there any other way? There's no other way. Dobson's going to play. Carrier's going to play. So if Reinbacher's up, then he's playing on the right side, and Goolie's going to play, and Hudson's going to play, and Matheson's going to play. So that leaves so that again emphasizes the point that Matheson has now become surplus.
Well, if he, that's true. And on the brink of getting a new deal, say, hey, we know that you've been you had over 60 points 2 years ago, and that you're an offensive defenseman. So here's what we have in store for you for your next contract. You're going to be a defensive third pairing defenseman. How about that, Mike?
Or you can go test the market. I mean, I think I know what I would do if I were Mike Matheson. So
right. So
I think, and it's important to note the timeline, right? So like that conversation happened at the Combine a couple of weeks ago, a few weeks ago now. In the last 4 or 5 days, according to Ken Hughes, is when he realized that Noah Dobson was going to become available. That's when I guess contract talks broke down with the Islanders. So that conversation that happened in Buffalo has completely changed. I think you could throw most of what was said in that conversation, not knowing what was said in that conversation. You could probably throw most of it out the window, right? Mike Matheson's context has changed drastically. The Canadiens' context has changed drastically. And so, Mike Matheson has, I believe, an 8-team no-trade list, which obviously leaves 24 teams to work with. But even then, I would think in a contract year, if Mike Matheson were approached with a possibility of going to a team that might be on his no-trade list, but would give him an opportunity to show the best version of himself, if I were him, I would jump at it, because his best opportunity to get paid, and remember, like, he's on a bargain deal negotiated by Ken Hughes with the Florida Panthers way back in the day. He hasn't hit his big payday, although according, in all of our worlds, he gets paid a gajillion dollars, but from an NHL player's perspective, he probably feels like he's been underpaid for the last 4 or 5 years. So that's going to be interesting to monitor what's going to happen with Mike Matheson now, because he is definitely part of the surplus. He's not in the same category of surplus as Mailloux or Engstrom or what have you. I really don't think the Canadiens would ever entertain the possibility of trading Reinbacher, but that's one category of team control, prime ahead of them sort of defenseman. And then you have Mike Matheson, who comes as a finished product, veteran, really good guy, leader, culture, all that stuff, that the Canadiens could also shop to address their needs up front. So So yeah, that's where it stands, and it's I think the one guy who comes out of this feeling or asking himself the most questions has to be Mike Matheson, who comes out of this Dobson deal.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay, Arpin, let's move on a bit. There was a NHL draft apart from that trade. The Canadiens.
Yes.
This it's funny because when we in a previous episode we discussed the possibility that among the slide candidates, Eklund could be one of those guys.
Yeah.
And we said, there are defensemen like Jackson Smith or Kashawn Aitchison. There's a possibility that someone else, a defenseman, could slide too. And it turns out that the Islanders were able at 16 and 17 to pick those two guys, which will inevitably be put in the balance to judge ultimately in a few years down the road. It was Noah Dobson for those two guys and Emil Heineman. But the Canadiens decided to move away from those two picks, which it was known by everybody that they were not in love with those two picks and they were shopping them. It was an interesting tidbit though from Martin Lapointe to say, you know what, we Alexander Jarofsky, we had him penciled pretty much at 17. So had they kept those two picks, he could have been their pick at 17. So they parlayed.
I mean, with Eklund on the board, I don't know if they would have. They probably had Eklund higher on their list than Jarofsky, I would have to think.
Yeah, but he was. Yeah, but anyway, that's what I'm just going by what Martin said. So maybe that they didn't have Aitchison that high. Who knows?
Maybe not. But I mean, what he said is that they had Jarofsky there. Yeah. What he didn't say is where they had Eklund and Aitchison.
Yeah,
I would imagine for sure Eklund. I think Eklund was probably higher on their list. Aitchison might have been lower. It's very possible. But yeah, I think if they had to pick between Eklund, they might have taken both of them. I don't know. But anyhow,
but that's it. That was the beauty of having two picks. So but they were able to get Jarofsky by trading up their 2 second-round picks to get to 34. Classic trading down from Carolina.
Yes.
Old habits die hard.
And Carolina and Kyle Dubas. So two people who just can't help themselves when it comes to the draft. Yeah.
So it's exciting to see that. Well, the Canadiens see top 6 potential in this Russian kid. Childhood friend with Ivan Demidov. Excellent set of hands. I think that this is, in terms of just pure puck handling skills, he's right up there with the most talented prospects in that draft. There are other issues. His skating is not necessarily his forte. He's lanky. He's very skinny.
Yeah.
And he's been playing also in a league that's pretty weak. So it's hard to properly evaluate. That's an issue that seems to plague the Q year after year, where how can you properly evaluate a prospect and how good he is when the competition is weak around you, So you can do all your fancy moves, but if you're put into a situation you're facing tougher competition, are you going to be able to maintain that same level? And on that front, what's encouraging with Jarofsky is the fact that he got better throughout the season, and the fact that he was called up by Salavat for the playoffs in the KHL is a testament of the ground he made throughout that season.
So this is where the similarities with how the Canadiens viewed Safkowski come in. So after the press conference, I asked Nick Bobrov about that issue, the quality of competition issue. And so he explained that so Jarofsky comes from this town called Klin, which is kind of northwest of Moscow. It's about 100 kilometers north of Moscow. It's not remote, but it's a small town. I looked it up, and he is the first player from that town ever to be drafted into the NHL, according to Elite Prospects. So it's not really a hockey hotbed, let's say. So Bobrov explained that when you come from a town like that, a smaller town that's sort of off the map hockey-wise, in Russia, you're very quickly put into a lane. And there's a fast track lane and there's a slow lane. And if you're not in the fast lane, it takes a while to get out of the slow lane and into the fast lane. So that's a bit, according to him, what happened with Zhuravsky is that he was kind of put into the slow lane, despite playing with Demidov as a youngster. He wound up in what's called the NMHL, which is a very low level of junior hockey in Russia. So similar to Slavkovsky, where he was playing in Liga, not having the role that you would love to see out of a number one overall pick, but then all of a sudden winds up going to the Olympics, goes to the World Championships at the end of the year, impresses on those big stages. This is something that carries a lot of weight for the Canadiens, and I think for Bobrov in particular, is the fact that Zhuravsky played in the playoffs with Ufa and played against. He mentioned, he played against Alex Radulov, and he's played against Radulov in the playoffs. Like this was something. So you're only looking at like a handful of games as a sample in those playoffs. But the fact he came from where he came from and wound up where he wound up and didn't look out of place playing in the KHL playoffs resonated with the Canadiens group. They had a chance, or Bobrov at least, I don't know who else saw him, but he had a chance to meet with him face to face when the Canadiens went to St. Petersburg to meet with Demidov in December. They met with him at the Gold Star camp in Fort Lauderdale. But, the profile as the late riser, the guy who performed on bigger stages, who ascended throughout the year, these are things that are appealing to the Canadiens, and even though it's very convenient for them to say, "Oh, well, we would have taken it. We had him ranked where we were originally slated to pick." Don't forget Craig Button in his mock draft mocked Zhuravsky to the Canadiens at 17.
Yeah.
So this isn't completely out of nowhere.
No, for sure.
And there were some. I think 17 was. I think that's the only place I saw Zhuravsky that high. But Craig obviously was matching teams to profiles and what have you. But I did see some lists toward closer to the draft where he was creeping into the late first round, late 20s, or the early 30s. So it's not that hard to believe that the Canadiens considered that to be his slot. But to get that kind of boomer bust swing at 34 is pretty good, and it shows a willingness, like, because you look at you do the pick value chart again, 41 and 49 is way more valuable than 34. Like that's a big overpay. And one thing that I know that Nick Bobrov and Martin Lapointe do pretty well is they have a decent gauge, like they have a decent amount of intelligence on what other teams like and which players other teams are in on. So when they say that they knew they had a competitive marketplace for this player, or for a certain handful of players at the beginning of the second round, I would tend to believe them. And the fact that they paid the price that they did lends credence to that, where they decided that there were a lot of teams that were trying to get Zhuravsky. There was a team at 34 in Carolina that is always going to be willing to trade down, no matter what. So, although you also have a team in Carolina who typically takes guys like Zhuravsky, he fits their profile to a T. You want
for sure.
Obscure Russian hockey players is right down Carolina Hurricanes alley. So it's but you can't, if you're Carolina, you can't say no to 41 and 49 for 34. That's incredibly good value. So, but yeah, it comes out looking like the Canadiens had their cake and got to eat it too. Like they got Dobson and they wind up with a kid that they were considering taking anyway at 17.
Yeah, absolutely. And both Bobrov and Lapointe mentioned that their mandate was to go after top six talent. And it seems obvious to say it like that, but when you look at their prospect pool as it currently stands, there are a lot of interesting prospects that are destined to be more bottom six guys, quality bottom six guys, but really top six potential. Apart from Michael Hage, outside of the NHL, there were not that many. So there was a need to replenish in that sense. And it might not be that every year they're going to swing for the fences, go for a boom or bust guy, say he's got top 6 potential, but there's a chance that it might not work, but we're going to take that chance. There will be maybe in other years they'll break things down differently, but right now the way that that pipeline is going, there was a need there for a guy who can aspire at a top 6 forward position down the road. So I think that adding compete and grit, and also adding right-handed shot defensemen, that was also one of their one of their priorities, and they surely followed that, right? So they added 3 of them. So
they added 3 of them, all late in the draft, and this is what I find interesting. So I remember last season at the end of the draft, I asked Bob Brav, I was like, when you look at your first draft to now, to what extent do you feel like the puzzle, in terms of building a prospect pool, is complete? And he seemed quite satisfied with the various elements that they've added to their prospect pool, from the Slavkovsky draft to the Demidov draft, and all the picks they took in between. So if you consider your prospect pool to be more or less complete, and you make a very good point that they were lacking top 6 potential forwards and they added 1, but the fact that they took 3 right shot D on the same weekend, they added Noah Dobson and basically solidified the right side of their blue line for the foreseeable future. I considered that to be very interesting. Like it's because their explanation, Bob Brav's explanation, was you look around the NHL, you look at the depth charts around the NHL, and this is a position where there's no depth. Like, not a lot of teams have a lot of this element. I mean, you could argue the Canadiens are probably the best served, in the sense that they have 2 NHL prospects that aren't even on the club yet. And then you have Carrier and you have Dobson. So for them to go out and further bolster that position, to me, at least lends the possibility that you look at the draft as there's a team building element to it, and there's an asset bank building element to it. And if you see that your parent club, the big club, is entering a phase where they're going to need to make trades to plug all the holes that they see on their team, acquiring players that will have value in trades makes some degree of sense. And I don't think it's solely because of that. I think they like these players, and could see these guys playing in Laval, being AHL depth, whatever. But if 1 or 2 of them hit among these defensemen, and let's be honest, like, chances are none of them are going to hit. They're all late round picks. But let's say one of them does, and you can flip that guy for something you need down the road, then that becomes very interesting. And it's worth noting, in a similar way, the 2 trades that they've made to add right shot D was for Justin Barron, who they traded for in the Arturi Lehkonen trade, and Emil Heineman, who they traded for in the Tyler Toffoli trade. So the Canadiens have already done this, in the sense that assets they brought in have been flipped to address holes on their team. And so when Bob Brav said that about the right shot D, I couldn't help but think, like, okay, well, that could be an example of them hoping to do this again. And they're just acquiring the ammunition to monetize it later down the road, when it's right D might not be an area of need for them, but it usually is for a good chunk of the rest of the league. So why not bank these guys? Why not hoard these guys and hope one of them develops into a piece that we can one day trade to address another hole somewhere else?
Yeah, that's a good point. You trade them, you draft them to trade them. At least you make them. You create a bank, and I think you can. Somebody, a wise man once said that you can never have too many defensemen. So I think that's
a wise man did once say that. Yes.
Yeah.
Another pick that I think was obviously interesting was the goalie Cournoyer. Pretty good story. His story is pretty good. Yeah.
His story. Yeah. So first, his father has been the PA announcer for the Shawinigan Cataracts for years. and where very, very briefly, I think he played one game for them, Alexis Cournoyer. But so his father, now Cournoyer is 19, he's going to turn 20 in December. He's had a very, very unusual path heading to, and I'll get to that in a minute. But the dream, he just had like a second half of the season in the queue in Cape Breton that was excellent. And so that paved the way to him being drafted by Montreal and earning a spot also at Cornell University. But his father said if he gets drafted, he posted that on social media. He says
on Facebook.
It was
very old timey.
Yeah. But last I checked, it's still social media.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So he said, I'm ready to go run in the streets in my underwear with clothespin tied to my nipples.
Yeah. If my son gets drafted, that was yeah.
So Cournoyer said, well, I just hope that my dad does not embarrass me. So
yeah.
And that's really weird. But this kid, I mean, when we spoke to him, he had as a light on the ceiling, he had like a recreation, a reproduction of like the Montreal Forum jumbotron, which
scoreboard,
is not, yeah, it was not a jumbotron, it was just a scoreboard. But behind him there was also the poster of a Montreal Canadiens goalie. I couldn't quite see if it was Carey Price or Patrick Roy, but I think it was one of the two. I suspect it was not Doug Soudart. But anyway, he was full on Montreal Canadiens. And for him, you know, when they say local kids, dream come true, for him, he could not pretend that he doesn't have to pretend that it is, because we have the memorabilia, we've got the decor to prove it.
he did an excellent mise en scène for his Zoom call for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So the guy was drafted late in the queue by Shawinigan, played one game there. Ultimately, on 3 separate occasions, he went to
the Maritime Junior A. He went to the Maritime Junior A Hockey League. Yeah,
he did, but he was cut from a Q team training camp 3 times overall.
It was Bécomo, I think, originally.
That's it.
Yeah.
First time from Shawinigan, second and third time from Bécomo. And ultimately, he went to Junior A in Truro, Nova Scotia. And only when he decided to say, you know what, screw that, I'm not going to take this seriously. I'm going to just go back and play with my buddies and have fun playing hockey. His game really took off. And at that point, Cape Breton, they had lost the goalies. The GM called him and say, you know what, we're going to bring you over for a couple of games, see what you got, and we'll take it from there. And he just ran away with the job. And he finished, his record was 13-6-1. A goal against allowed average of 182 and save percentage of 942. So this is a guy who seemingly comes out of nowhere, who's been disregarded throughout his junior career by the Q, and ultimately prevails late in the game to such extent that the Canadiens say, you know what, this guy, this late riser who's when he was given the opportunity, he took it and his game took off. Well, the Canadiens, they jump on that opportunity. I find it's a great story. And just to finish out on that is that he thought that he didn't have much expectations of being drafted, although that's what he hoped for. But he also already had an agreement with the Nashville Predators to attend their development camp. And he was like 15 or 20 minutes away from heading to the airport when he heard his name called. So he had to cancel those plans.
Yeah. That's the most incredible part. And that, just showed he was in demand. And so he becomes, in the last 3 drafts, the Canadiens have now taken 6 goalies. 3 in 2023, which obviously Jacob Fowler in the 3rd round, Conte Miller, and Evgeny Volokin, who will be at development camp starting on Tuesday. And then they had the Latvian goalie, Vekbanags. Remember famously
Yeah.
Martin Lapointe breaking the story that he'd be going to Cape Breton actually at the 2024 draft. It didn't work out. I think another team drafted him in the queue in the international draft. He wound up going to like the BC Hockey League, if I'm not mistaken. Anyhow, whatever. And so he wound up. Oh no, it was Acadie Bathurst. It wasn't Cape Breton. And he wound up back in Acadie Bathurst last season. And then this year they took the Belarusian goalie Arseny Radkov in the third round, similar spot to Fowler, and obviously Cournoyer in the fifth round. So that's another case where they seem to want to keep the steady stream of goaltenders coming through the system in the hopes that one will hit. And it's not a bad strategy because you never know. Its goalies are just like that, and so I think it's a good swing on Cournoyer, considering his unique development path, and he's kind of at an advanced age, which also kind of fits the Canadiens brand at that point in the draft of drafting later guys. But yeah, so
And also, if I can just add to this, the fact that there's one guy who plays in Europe, the other one is heading to college, to the NCAA. So they're on paths they're more on long-term paths, which is
yeah,
always what you want for goalies instead of rushing them to professional hockey.
which thankfully that's going to change next year, where CHL goalies will have a 4-year runway. Well, assuming you're 18, well, you have a runway until you're 22.
Yeah, but
Teams will have a runway until you're 22. Yeah,
sure, in terms of contract, yes, but you'll still need a place to play once you graduated from junior. So
yeah. No, I know, but it is good that teams don't have to decide on goalies and players in general, frankly, out of the CHL.
yeah, definitely.
As of 26, 27. So speaking of the draft, I think we should talk about the draft a little bit because you were there and because we all watched on television, and it was just terrible entertainment. Was not well executed. I saw some people saying, like, don't blame the NHL for this. It's the GMs that wanted it. Yeah, the GMs wanted a decentralized draft, but the NHL was ultimately in charge of putting together how it was going to happen. And I think they just got in their own way a little bit. There was just too much going on. There was too much time between picks. But I'm curious. So we all saw it from the TV standpoint. You were there.
Yeah.
Compare the vibe in the Peacock Theater to. Well, you weren't at Sphere last year, but obviously that's the other extreme. But to a typical draft held in a hockey arena with the riser and the tables and whatever, like, just what are compare and contrast the two experiences live.
So in a regular draft, having the tables, having all the organizations on the floor, that's half of the fun. We talk about behind the scenes. Well, for this one day. It's not behind the scene. The scene is right in front of you. You can see trades happen in real time because there are negotiations, guys going from one table to the next. We've seen change of agents. When in the Pacioretty,
That's
remember
right.
the Pacioretty
Sure.
Just before Pacioretty was traded, or a few weeks before, when he changed agents, we saw Alan Walsh going to talk to Marc Bergevin. It was right in front of us. Things like that. So I think that this is an important part of the show. The second part is the fact that in an arena, all the upper bowl will be filled with fans from that city.
Right.
So in terms
from other cities. I mean, there's some fans who travel. Yeah.
Sure. But the place will be filled, and it's going to create a lot of atmosphere. So all the booing you hear towards Gary Bettman, cheers for the hometown picks, boos against the direct rivals of the city where the draft is taking place. All of that, it contributes to creating an atmosphere that makes the draft a lot of fun. You're right by saying that the setup that was organized by the NHL was not up to par. But Gary Bettman did not hide the fact that he was not in favor of it, and it's the GM's 26-6. They voted in favor of that decentralized draft. There's a lot of buyer's remorse, clearly. So I think that this will be a one-off, but the result was just pathetic. It had no rhythm. It looked as though at the end, how do you call that in English? Before prom, when you go for you graduation and you go get your diploma,
Yeah,
So,
that's
so
graduation. Yeah, that's the
yeah.
graduation ceremony. Yeah.
Well, that's what it looked like. It looked like a long. You'd look at the kids going to get their diploma at a very slow pace, and you have a giant screen and some wonky Zoom calls in the corner. So
Yeah.
all in all, it did not make for a good show, and it was just endless. It took so long. Trust me, it did not feel any faster on site than it was on television.
And that's what the one thing I don't understand is, did you not do a dry run? Did you not go through an entire draft in simulated form to figure out how long is this going to take to do 32 Zoom calls with the front office,
Yeah,
then the broadcast interview, then this, then the clock, and then this, and then that? As it stands, if every team made their pick, if it was just teams making their picks, every team has 3 minutes to make their pick. There's 32 teams, so that should result in 90. That's 96 minutes that you're starting with.
yeah,
That's the minimum amount of time you need. Normally, the first round of the draft takes roughly 3 hours, three hours and change, right? Starts at 7, it ends at 10, 10:30, somewhere around there. But it moves, and there's stuff going on. Like when a team is on the clock, you're showing that team at their draft table and they're talking and they're doing this or they're on the phone or whatever. And there's some drama that's created. Uh, there was no such drama here. And again, yes, the GMs overwhelmingly voted for this. And frankly, many of them were voting on behalf of their owners who thought they would save some money doing it this way, which ultimately probably did not turn out to be the case because you still have to fly all your scouts to your city. You still have to put them up in hotels in your city because very few of them actually live there. Just in Montreal's case, none of their scouts live in Montreal. Maybe Donald Odette does. I'm not sure, or Serge Boisvert. I don't know to what extent. But very few of their scouts live here. So you're still putting up a lot of people in hotels. It's still costing a lot of money. You have to set up a war room, which the Canadiens did in the Canadiens dressing room. A lot of the teams did it in their dressing rooms in their arenas, but some teams, I know the Flyers were in Atlantic City at the Hard Rock Cafe and Casino or whatever. Various teams had various setups, but you still that there was a cost to that. It just and just because the GMs voted to do it this way didn't mean the NHL had to do it literally the way that they did it. And you would have thought that they would have, in rehearsal at some point, would have realized that, you know what, this is too long. Like this, we can't pull this off. Let's get rid of the draft house. And I heard an interview with Steve Mayer. I think it was on 32 Thoughts. And he was saying we usually get to see the kids and we get to talk to the kids, but we never get to see how they interact with the team for the first time. Like this is going to be amazing. And it was awful, it was
terrible.
like,
there's a reason why we don't see that. It's not.
Well, no, but when there's no cameras on them, they're a lot more colorful, right? They're excited or whatever. But this was clearly
awkward.
This was clearly awkward and done with knowing that the entire league and the entire world is watching them. Like it wasn't a true introduction to the kid,
Yeah, absolutely.
The only one that was good was Matthew Schaefer. I mean, Matthew Schaefer's. The show started with a bang because Matthew Schaefer was so emotional, and obviously everyone knows his tragic story, and his dad's crying, and then he gets up and he's crying when he's talking to Matthew Darsh, and he's the emotion, like that was compelling. That was compelling stuff, and it was really good. And then from that point on, and then it only took till the 7th pick for there to be a technical glitch, and James Hagan's not being able to talk to Cam Neely and Don Sweeney, who didn't even seem to realize that they were on camera. They were just staring into space, not saying anything. So from that point on, it was.
And plus the 3-minute timing that you're on. You're on the
clock. Yeah,
you're on the clock. There was no clock. There was
a clock, but the Sharks, the number 2 pick.
That's why I'm saying. That's why I'm saying that there was no clock.
Everyone knew they were taking Michael Misa. I mean, there was some question, but That
They
clock
had
was
3 minutes,
on
and
0.
it turned out, it turned out taking more than 5.5 minutes rather than 3. So
I
it's
feel like the clock was on 0 for 5 minutes.
maybe,
When there
it
was
was
like it was so the clock expired and I didn't time it, but it felt like 5 minutes. It's probably not
right.
as long. It's probably not that long, but I'm just like, why even have a clock? That
That's
clock's
it.
been on 0 for forever. What's going
No,
on here?
that really
So,
did not help.
well,
Anyway, this is behind us. Hopefully we'll get to
you
different
should consider yourself lucky that you were live in person for that to witness that. This is
amazing.
you
Yeah,
will
yeah.
you will have witnessed the only one of these drafts. It's an honor and a privilege that you were there to see it.
It's the only draft that I will ever cover where I did not speak to a single Canadiens draft selection. So
Yes.
with the two moved on Friday, I ended up, I went to LA to talk to a basketball player
So Lou
because
Dort.
to Logan Dort. Yeah, that's it. All
Yeah.
right, listen, Arpin. We're recording this on Sunday. Usually we have a subscribers episode every Monday, but it's free agency day on Tuesday. So
Yeah.
instead of doing this, having one episode on Sunday and another one the day after, we're going to move our Monday episode to Tuesday, give it some breathing room a little bit, and have some more meat to talk about also on Tuesday. So hopefully that all the glitches and the issues that we've had while I was in LA will have subsided. And
Yeah.
so how about that for our subscribers? You'll get your episode on Tuesday for first day of free agency.
Yeah, it'll probably be Tuesday evening. Ken Hughes, I would imagine, will speak to the media towards the end of the day. Obviously, free agency opens at noon. The Canadiens also kick off
Their
development
development
camp,
camp.
and there should be some interesting people that we'll get to talk to on Tuesday as well. So we'll bring you all that. Probably Tuesday evening, so you might actually listen to it on Wednesday morning or whatever. But anyhow, that's kind of the timing of the next little while. And then we'll go back to our regular schedule for a brief time on Friday. We'll have another episode, and then we're going to come up with a summer schedule where we're not going to be doing this twice a week. All summer, we'll have some episodes here and there. Obviously, if news happens, we'll probably do kind of emergency pods. But we're going to, over the course of this week, we're going to come up with a sort of a summer plan. But we will be doing episodes over the summer. They will not be nearly as frequent, but you'll know ahead of time when they're coming. But in the meantime, let's leave it here for now. We'll talk to you on Tuesday. And this, again, just to reemphasize, puts an end to just a highly, highly consequential weekend for the Montreal Canadiens and their rebuild. Let's see what they're able to do between now and the next time we speak, because I do have the feeling something will happen between this episode and our next one. So tune in on Tuesday to, well, not find out, but to see what we think about what the Canadiens have done or not done. Then talk to you then.
All right. Goodbye, everybody.